I was sitting at the kitchen table looking at the month's bank statement. Another transfer, another bill paid, another problem solved. And then I realized something that chilled me to the bone. I couldn't remember the last time my son had said, "Thank you." Not genuinely, not looking me in the eye. Maybe never. Silence is also an answer. Because I had just realized that, for years, I had been living a dynamic that I never questioned. And you? Have you ever stopped to notice when someone simply stops seeing you as a person? My son was 28 years old, 28, and I was still paying his rent in Portland, Oregon. Not because he didn't work, he did. Not because he didn't earn money, he earned enough to survive. But survive was never enough. There was always something. A car repair, a medical emergency that the insurance didn't fully cover, a laptop that broke down just when he needed it for an important project. Always urgent, always necessary, and always expected. I would transfer the money. He would confirm receipt. Okay, I received it. And that was it. No, thank you. No, Dad, you saved me. No, I don't know what I would do without you. Just confirmation. As if I were an ATM. At first, I thought it was just his way. My son was never one for many words, always more reserved, more pragmatic. I justified it by saying, he knows that I know he's grateful. But did he really know? Was he grateful? Or was I doing what we always do when we love someone? Filling in the empty spaces with the narrative we need to believe? Because when I looked at our conversations, at the message history, I saw a pattern. He only contacted me when he needed something, never to ask how I was doing, never to tell me about his life, never to share an achievement, a joy, a moment. Only problems, only needs, only demands. And I always responded. I always solved problems. I was always there. Because that's what parents do, right? We don't abandon them. We don't turn our backs on them. We weather the storm, even when the storm keeps coming. But that night, looking at that bank statement, I felt empty. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hurt yet. It was just a strange emptiness. Like I'd just woken up from a dream and realized I was alone in the room. And you know that feeling? When you do everything right, but still feel like something is fundamentally wrong. The following week, he called. It was Sunday night, almost 10 o'clock. My stomach clenched even before I answered, because I already knew. A Sunday night call is never to say hi. It's to ask for something before Monday even starts. Dad, I have a problem. Straight to the point. No, how are you? No, sorry for calling late. Just the problem. His car had a serious problem. The transmission, $1,500 to fix. He didn't have it. The mechanic was holding the car until he got paid. He needed the car for work. It was an emergency. You understand how it works, right? I listened in silence. And for the first time in years, I didn't immediately say, "Okay, I'll handle it." I stayed quiet, just breathing. And in that 3 or 4 second silence, I heard something I'd never heard before. Impatience. "Dad, are you there?" Not concern, not, "Are you okay?" It was irritation. As if I had an obligation to respond quickly, to solve things quickly, to do my job quickly. "I'm listening," I said. "When is it urgent?" "Tomorrow morning. They open at 8. If I transfer now, they'll release the car by noon. Timed, planned, expected." I asked, "And have you tried to solve it another way?" His silence now, short, confused, as if the question made no sense. "What other way, Dad? I don't have the money. That's why I'm calling." "That's why you're calling. Not because you're my father and I trust you. Not because I know I can count on you. That's why. Because I am the solution, the tool, the available resource." "Okay," I said. "Let me see what I can do." I hung up, and I realized my hands were trembling, not from anger, from recognition. Because I had just heard, for the first time clearly, the tone of voice of someone who doesn't see you as a person, only as a function. And you, have you realized too late that someone never thanked you because they never thought they needed to? Look, before I continue, I need to tell you something. If this story is touching something inside you, if you've ever felt that emptiness of being useful but never valued, subscribe to the channel. It's not just a click. It's you saying, I've been through this too, and I want to hear it until the end. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching me from right now? Because I want to know where you are while this story reaches you. I read every comment, every single one, believe me. I transferred the money that night, $1,500. I always transferred, but this time I stared at the confirmation on my phone screen with a different feeling. Guilt. Not guilt for helping. Guilt for realizing that maybe I had done everything wrong. That maybe, by giving so much, I had taught my son that he didn't need to say thank you. That he didn't need to reciprocate. That he didn't even need to acknowledge it. Because I would always be there. Unconditionally. Automatically. Guaranteed. My ex-wife had warned me years ago. We were already separated, but she still called occasionally. And in one of those calls, she had said, "You're creating dependency. He'll never mature if you solve." Everything for him. I had argued back, defended her, said she was too harsh, that she lacked empathy, that a father needs to be present. But now, alone in the kitchen, at 11 o'clock at night, I wondered, was she right? Because my son wasn't incapable. He had a job, he had friends, he had a girlfriend, he functioned in the world. But with me, he was a different person. With me, he reverted to being a child, not in innocence, in need, in the certainty that I would solve everything. And the worst part, he didn't even try to hide it. He didn't even try to seem grateful. Because why bother? I never demanded anything. I never said, "Wait a minute, where's the thank you?" I never set a limit. I thought that's what love was. Being available. Always. Without questioning. Without asking for anything in return. But love without reciprocity is not love. It's servitude. And you know when you realize that? When you stop for a second and ask yourself, if I disappeared tomorrow, would he miss me? Or just what I do for him? I tried to sleep that night, but I couldn't. I just stared at the ceiling, replaying years in my mind. Birthdays he forgot. Holidays he didn't show up for. Promises of visits that never materialized. And every time I asked, "Is everything all right?" the answer was always the same. "I'm busy, Dad. We'll talk later." Then it never arrived. Unless he needed money. Then it would turn around. I got out of bed at 3 a.m. and opened my laptop. I went to my bank transfer history. Last 2 years. I added it up. $18,000, $18,000. In emergencies, in unforeseen events, in just this once, Dad. I looked at that number and felt nauseous. Not because of the money, I could give it. Financially, I was stable, but emotionally I was bankrupt. Have you ever felt like that? Rich in giving, but poor in receiving. 2 days later, he texted, "Car fixed. Thanks. Thanks. Not thank you. Thanks." As if I'd done him. A casual little favor. As if I hadn't just transferred the equivalent of his rent. I stared at the message for about 5 minutes, just staring, and then I typed, "You're welcome. How are you?" I sent it. I waited. Viewed. No response. 3 hours later, he posted on his Instagram stories. He was at a bar with friends, beer in hand, smiling, celebrating something. And I thought, he has time to go out, to post, to laugh. But he doesn't have time to answer, "I'm good, and you?" I wasn't angry. I was sad. That kind of muted sadness. The kind that doesn't scream. The kind that just weighs you down. The kind that accumulates on your shoulders and slowly bends you over. Because anger passes, this kind of sadness stays. I started noticing other things, small things, details that I used to overlook. When I commented on one of his photos, he never replied. When I sent him interesting articles, he would only like them, but not comment. When I talked about my day, he would change the subject. He wasn't interested. He wasn't curious. He didn't have emotional space for me. I was a background figure in his life, useful when needed, invisible the rest of the time. And there's one thing about being ignored by someone you love. It hurts more than any fight. Because in a fight, at least you exist. In silence, you're just nothing. I called him over the weekend. He didn't answer. I texted him asking if everything was okay. Yeah, just busy. Busy, always busy, but never too busy to ask for money. And that's when I realized I was afraid of being a nuisance, afraid of calling at the wrong time, afraid of bothering him. And him, he wasn't afraid at all, because he knew I would always answer, always help, always be available. Respect had become one-sided. I started to wonder, when did this begin? When did I stop being a father and become just a provider? When did I love you turn into I need you? Or has it always been this way, and I just didn't want to see it? Because there's something about denying the truth. We can do it for a long time. Until one day, we can't anymore. And on that day, alone in my room in Seattle, staring at a phone that never rang unless it was to ask for something, I couldn't take it anymore. Have you ever had to admit that the person you love most maybe doesn't love you back in the same way? The last straw wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a scandal. It was a date. My birthday. 63 years old. I wasn't expecting a party. I wasn't expecting presents. But I was expecting something. A phone call. A message. A happy birthday, Dad. Nothing. The whole day passed. I checked my phone every hour. Nothing. Friends sent messages. Co-workers. Even my cousin from Ohio, whom I spoke to once a year. But my son? Silence. I went to sleep at 10 o'clock at night. Alone. In silence. And I felt something I had never felt before. Irrelevance. I was irrelevant in my own son's life. The next day he texted. Noon. Dad, sorry. Yesterday was hectic. Happy belated birthday. No emojis. No I love you. No you're important to me. Just an obligation fulfilled late. And you know what I did? I replied, okay, thank you. Because that's what I did. I accepted it. I understood. I let it go. Always. But something broke in that, it's okay. Something inside me simply gave up. Not on loving him, but on waiting for him to see me. 3 days later, he called. I already knew why, and I was right. He needed help with the security deposit for a new apartment. $800. I get paid next week, Dad, but they need the money today. Always today. Always urgent. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in 28 years I said, I can't right now. Silence on the other end. Long, confusing. What do you mean it can't be done? I can't, son. My expenses are tight this month. That's a lie. I had the money, but I needed to see. I needed to know what would happen if I said no. But Dad, it's only $800. You always. I'll get paid next week. It's like a loan. You always. He was right. I always. And that's why he expected me to always. I know, but it's not possible this time. Sorry. Dad, seriously? I'm going to lose the apartment. They already have other people interested. Pressure, urgency, guilt, the same tools. Always. Try with your mother, I said, or with the bank. But I can't. He hung up. Without, okay. Without, I understand. He just hung up. And there, in the silence after the call, I realized he was angry, not sad, not worried about me, angry because I had failed in my duty, because I hadn't fulfilled my role. And you know what was worse? I felt guilty. I, who had given $18,000 in 2 years, felt guilty for saying no once. Because that's what happens when you teach someone that you have no limits. When you finally set some, you're the villain. He didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. 2 whole weeks. No messages, no calls, nothing. And you know what was revealing? I realized his silence wasn't any different from normal, because he wasn't talking to me anyway. The only difference was that now I knew it was intentional. I didn't chase after him. I didn't text to ask if everything was okay. I didn't apologize. I just stopped too. And in the silence, I started to hear things that were always there, but that I had suppressed with justifications. I heard my ex-wife's voice saying, "You're becoming dependent." I heard my brother years ago saying, "You let that boy walk all over you." I even heard my own voice in moments of exhaustion thinking, when is he going to grow up? But I always silenced those voices because I was afraid. Afraid that if I stopped giving, I would lose my son. Afraid that he would abandon me. Afraid of being alone. But now, sitting in this silence of 2 weeks, I realized I was already alone. And I had been alone for years. The illusion of connection wasn't connection. It was just a transaction. On the 16th day, he texted, "I got the apartment." "No, without your help." "No, I asked someone else. Just the information." As if he wanted me to know he didn't need me. I didn't reply immediately. I left the message there, for hours. And when I finally replied, I wrote, "That's great. I'm glad for you." Short, neutral, just like he always was with me. But you know when you change and the other person doesn't notice? Because for them, you were never a complete person, just a function. And functions don't have feelings. I started observing myself, my routine, my day-to-day life. I realized I was living in a state of waiting for him to call, waiting for him to need me, waiting for me to be useful. Because being useful was the only way I knew how to be loved with him. But love conditioned on usefulness is not love. It's emotional slavery. I started therapy, 63 years old, and it was the first time I sat in a room and said to a stranger, "I don't think my son loves me." And she didn't say, "No, I'm sure he does." She said, "And how do you feel about that?" I cried. I cried in a way I hadn't cried since my mother died. I cried because for the first time I was allowing myself to feel, not justify, not rationalize, just feel. And the pain was immense. But you know what else? On the other side of the pain, there was clarity. There was truth. There was a beginning. Have you ever had to fall apart in order to start rebuilding yourself? A month after the apartment incident, I was better. Not cured, but better. Therapy was helping me understand patterns, to see that I had repeated with my son the same dynamic I experienced with my father, giving without receiving, waiting without demanding, loving without being seen. And then he called. It was a Thursday night. I was having dinner, alone, but relaxed. I looked at his name on the screen and felt nothing. No anxiety, no hope, nothing. And that scared me more than any anger. I answered, "Dad." Tense voice, worried. "I need to talk to you." My body reacted before my mind, racing heart, cold hands, because 28 years of conditioning don't disappear in a month of therapy. "I'm listening." "It's about Mom. She called me today. She said you're acting differently, that you're not answering her properly, that you seem distant. Are you okay?" My ex-wife. Of course. She had noticed, because I had stopped answering her calls as well, stopped being her emotional support, even after years of divorce. And she, like my son, didn't like it. I'm fine, I said. Just busy. Busy with what? He sounded genuinely confused, as if I couldn't possibly be busy, as if my life consisted only of waiting. With therapy, with my hobbies, with friends. Silence. Therapy? Yes, I started last month. Why? Did something happen? And there it was. The question. The door opened for me to finally tell the truth, for me to finally let out everything that had been bottled up for years. But I didn't go through that door. Not yet. Because I knew that if I said it now, in the midst of the tension, it would come across as an attack. And I didn't want to attack. I wanted to protect myself. I just thought it would be good, I said, to take care of my mental health. Okay. He didn't know what to say. And then, as always, he changed the subject. Look, I called because I need some advice. Not, how are you? Not, do you want to talk about therapy? Just, I need it. And I almost laughed, almost, because it was so predictable, so perfectly planned. He only remembered me when he needed something. And I had accepted it for so long that he didn't even notice anymore. What kind of advice? My voice came out flat. He hesitated. He felt something. Maybe. Never mind. We'll talk later. He hung up, and I stood there, phone in hand, dinner getting cold on my plate, realizing he had sensed it. For the first time, he had sensed that something was different, that I wasn't responding the way he expected. And instead of asking, of caring, of trying to understand, he hung up. Why bother trying to understand? Why bother? I'd always go back to normal, right? But this time, I wasn't sure if I would come back. December arrived, holiday season, a time I always hated and pretended to love, because it was the time when his absence became most obvious. Everyone gathered with family, and me, alone. Or worse, waiting for a call that never came. But this year, I decided differently. I accepted my brother's invitation to spend Christmas in Denver. He had been insisting for years, and I always refused. What if my son wants to come? He never wanted to. But I always left the possibility open. Not this time. I bought the ticket. I texted my son, I'm going to spend Christmas in Denver with your uncle. If you want to come, let me know and I'll buy your ticket too. He saw it. He didn't reply. 3 days later. I won't be able to. I have work. Work. Right in the, middle of Christmas. But it's okay. I was expecting it. All right? Merry Christmas. To you too. And that was all. I went to Denver. I spent 10 days with my brother, my sister-in-law, and my nephews. And you know what I realized? How much noise there is in a house full of people who really want you there. People who ask how you are and wait for the answer. People who laugh at your jokes. People who include you in their conversations. On the second day, my 16-year-old nephew asked me about my work. He really wanted to know. He asked questions. He was interested. And in the middle of the conversation, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relevance. My brother noticed. On the 4th day after dinner, he called me over for a beer in the backyard. Cold Colorado weather, sky full of stars. You're different, he said. Better or worse? Lighter. But sadder too. I took a sip. I remained silent. And then I said, I think I've finally stopped waiting. What are we waiting for? That he may see me. My brother didn't ask who. He knew. And did he see? No. And I don't think it ever will. We were quiet for a while, and then he said something that broke me. You've always been a good father, but maybe you were too much of a father, and not enough of a person. I cried there, in the cold, hidden in the darkness. Because he was right. I had erased myself. I had transformed my entire identity into his father. And when that role wasn't valued, I crumbled. Because I had nothing left. That's all I was. At Christmas, my son texted me, "Merry Christmas, Dad." At 3 p.m, generic, without emotion. I replied, "Merry Christmas. I'm with your uncle. We send our regards." He didn't answer. And I realized it didn't hurt. Not like before. Because I was beginning to understand. His indifference wasn't about me. It was about him. About what he was capable of giving. And I couldn't change that. Have you ever felt relief when you gave up? I returned from Denver at the beginning of January. I came back different, more whole in a way, but also more distant. Distant from him. Distant from the illusion. He didn't ask how the trip was. He didn't ask anything, and I didn't tell him. Not because I was holding a grudge, but because I was learning. If he doesn't ask, it's because he doesn't want to know. And forcing intimacy where there's no interest is humiliating. January passed. February began. He didn't call. He didn't text. And for the first time, I didn't text either. I waited. Just to see. Just to be sure. 5 weeks. 5 whole weeks without contact. And in the middle of the 5th week, he showed up. Not with, "Hi, Dad, I miss you," but with, "I need help." His laptop had broken down. He needed a new one for work. He couldn't wait. The deadline for an important project was tight, $1,200. I looked at the message. Long, detailed, justifying, explaining, as if I needed context to be convinced. And I realized he hadn't contacted me to talk, to find out about me, to share our lives. He had contacted me because he needed money, again. 5 weeks of silence. And I was relevant now because I was useful. I replied, "I won't be able to help with that." Immediate. "What?" "Dad, I need the notebook." "I know, but you'll have to solve it another way." "What other way? You know I don't have that money right now." "Credit card, installment plan, loan. Ask your mom. Sell something. You'll find a way." 3 little dots appearing and disappearing, appearing and disappearing. I could almost feel his anger through the screen. "Are you mad at me?" he finally asked. And that question, that damn question, as if anger were the only possible explanation for me saying no, as if love always meant saying yes. "I'm not angry. I just can't help." "Since when?" "I've always thought so, but I wrote, from now on." He called. I didn't answer. He called again. I didn't answer. Then he texted, "We need to talk." And there it was. Finally, the conversation. But not because he wanted to understand me, because he wanted to convince me. I wrote, "When you have real time to talk, not just to ask for money, we can talk. Until then, good luck with the laptop." I turned off notifications and went to sleep. And I slept. Peacefully. For the first time in months. Because I had finally set a boundary. And boundaries aren't punishment. They're protection. He showed up at my house 3 days later, without warning. He knocked. On the door at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. I opened it, and he was there. Tired. Confused. Angry. "You don't answer my calls anymore?" He entered uninvited. I closed the door. "You didn't call to talk. You called to insist." "Insisting on what? For you to help me? You're my father." And there it was. The final letter. "You are my father." As if that explained everything. As if that justified everything. "I know who I am," I said, calmly, firmly. "But do you know who you are?" He looked at me as if I had gone mad. "What kind of question is that?" "You are my son," I said. "But what else?" Because for me, a son isn't just someone who asks. It's someone who asks, someone who cares, someone who is present. And you? When was the last time you asked how I am? Silence. He searched his memory. I saw it in his eyes. Searching, and not finding. I always think you're okay. Why? Because I solve your problems? Because I never complain? Because I always say yes? No. Because you are you. You've always been stable. Stable. I repeated the word. And you think stable means I don't need anything, that I don't feel anything. He looked away. Look, I didn't come here for that. I came because I really need the laptop, and you've always helped me, always. And now, out of nowhere, you've changed, and I don't understand why. Because I'm tired, I said, and it was liberating to say it out loud. I'm tired of being useful, but not important. I'm tired of only being sought out when you need something. I'm tired of giving without receiving. And I know you'll say that's not true, that you love me, that you just don't show it. But love without demonstration is invisible, and I'm tired of feeling invisible. He didn't answer. He stood there in my living room, looking at me as if he were a stranger. And perhaps he was. Because the father, who always said yes, who always solved problems, who was always available, that man had died. And in his place, there was a man who had finally learned to say no. So that's it? He asked. His voice was low, almost childlike. You're going to abandon me? And that word, abandon, as if setting limits meant abandonment, as if self-love meant selfishness. No, I said, I'm not going to abandon you, but I'm not going to abandon myself for you anymore either. He left, without saying anything else, without slamming the door. He just left. And I stayed there, alone in the room, feeling the weight of what I had just done. And you? Know what was worse? I didn't regret it. After that night, the silence was absolute. No messages, no calls, nothing. And I let it go. Because I knew, if I chased after him, if I asked, is everything all right? I would be reverting to the old pattern. And old patterns don't build new futures. I use that time for myself. Therapy twice a week, gym. I started playing guitar again, something I hadn't done since I was 30. I went out with friends I had neglected for years because I was always available for my son. And you know what I understood? How much of my life I had put on hold, how much I had sacrificed. Not because someone asked me to, but because I thought that's what parents did. To erase themselves, to exclude themselves, to exist only through their children. But children grow up, children leave home. And when they leave home, if you don't have a life of your own, you're left with nothing. 2 months after that night, he texted. Short. Can we talk? I took a while to respond. Not because of the game, but because I wanted to be sure I was ready, that I wasn't going to give in, that I wasn't going back. Yes. When and where? Tomorrow. Coffee near your house. Noon. I arrived 5 minutes late on purpose, because I needed to break even the smallest patterns. I always arrived early. I always waited. He was already there, nervous, fiddling with his phone. When he saw me, he stood up. He wanted to hug me. I let him. But I didn't reciprocate with the same intensity. And he felt it. We sat down. We ordered coffee. And we were silent for a while. Until he said, I've thought a lot about what you said. And you're right. About everything. I didn't answer. I just waited. I never thought about how you felt. I always thought you were okay. That you enjoyed helping. That that's what made you happy. Helping makes me happy, I said. Being used doesn't. He lowered his head. I didn't want to use you. I swear. I didn't know how to do it differently. You always solved everything for me, ever since I was little. And I never learned to solve things on my own. And worse, I never learned to be grateful. My chest tightened, because he was saying the right words. But words are easy. Change is hard. Being grateful isn't just saying thank you, I said. It's being present. It's asking. It's caring. It's giving back. And you've never done any of that. I know. He looked at me. Red eyes. And I want to do things differently. But I don't know how. And there was the truth. He really didn't know. Because I never taught him. Because I always did things for him. Because I never demanded reciprocity. You learn by doing, I said, and by making mistakes, and by trying again. But I'm not going to save you from all the consequences anymore. I'm not going to solve everything anymore. Because I realized, the more I do for you, the less you do for yourself. And that's not helping you. It's killing you little by little. He cried, right there, in the middle of the coffee. And I let him. I didn't console him. I didn't downplay it. I just let him. Because sometimes, the best thing we can do for the people we love is to let them feel. 6 months after that conversation, my son didn't become a different person overnight. There was no miraculous transformation, but there were small changes, small and significant. He started calling. Not every day, but once a week. And on the calls, he would ask, "How are you?" And wait for the answer. Really. And we would talk. About his life. About mine. About nothing. Just talk. He didn't ask for money again. Not because he didn't need it, but because he learned to solve problems in other ways. Credit card, personal loan, selling things, extra work. And every time he solved it on his own, he called me. Not to congratulate me, but to share the money. I did it, Dad. It was hard, but I did it. And I felt pride. But I also felt pain, because I realized he was, always capable. It was me who didn't let him be. On my birthday this year, he showed up, unannounced, with a cake he made himself. Crooked, ugly, underbaked. But he made it. It didn't turn out well, he said, laughing nervously. But I wanted to try. And in that awful cake, I saw more love than in all the expensive gifts I never received. We sat down, we ate bad cake, we talked. And in the middle of the conversation, he said, "Thank you, Dad." Why? For not giving up on me, even when I deserved it. I would never give up on you, I said. But I needed to give up on who I was being, because that guy wasn't helping either of us. He agreed, and we fell silent. But it was a different kind of silence. Not empty, full of presence, full of something we'd never had before, reciprocity. The relationship wasn't perfect. There are still difficult days. There are still misunderstandings. There's still distance. But there's effort. From both sides. And effort, even imperfect. Effort is worth more than perfection without interest. And I learned something that changed my life. Boundaries don't destroy love. They build respect. And respect is the foundation of any worthwhile relationship. Today, I look at my son, and I no longer see obligation. I see choice. He chooses me. And I choose him. But I also choose myself. And that made all the difference. Because you can love someone. But if you don't love yourself first, that love becomes sacrifice. And sacrifice, in the end, breeds resentment. And resentment kills everything. So if you recognize yourself in this story, if you're feeling invisible, used, exhausted, maybe it's time for you to stop. Not to stop loving, but to stop losing yourself. Because the best thing you can do for the one you love is to find yourself first. If this story touched you, if you saw yourself in it at any point, I need to ask you something. Leave a like. It's not just a click. It's you saying, "I understood, I felt it," and that matters. And subscribe to the channel. Because stories like this aren't easy to tell, and I know they aren't easy to hear, but they need to be told. And you need to know that you're not alone in this. Now, look at the screen. There's a video waiting for you, and I'm not going to tell you it's just another story. Because it's not. It's a continuation of what you just felt. It's the next piece of the emotional puzzle that you may not even have known you were putting together. Click. Watch. Because you deserve to fully understand what's happening inside you. And remember, setting limits isn't selfishness. It's about survival.